Okay, so we're going to get into the basics, what we mean with some terminology and some of the very fundamental aspects of the game. So first of all, we're going to start with the concept of dex. So in Force of Virtue, you build your force using cards, not points or anything like that. Everything you take in the game is represented on a card that has its rules, its stats, everything like that. I'm also going to talk a little bit about, in the rules, sometimes we use certain terms that are going to be important for understanding what we mean. So first off, the difference between a D6 and a D3. Very fundamental for this game. When I say a D6, that means roll a 6-sided dice and you read the value on it, 2, okay? If the rules say a D3, I roll the dice and I divide it by 2, rounding up, so that 3 is actually a value of 2. If I were to roll a 5, it would be a value of 3, and a 2 would be a value of 1, okay? So we'll be using that for movement and certain other things. Next, another important term is the difference between a simple roll and a virtue roll. We'll be talking about the virtues differently later on. So, a simple roll means it's a normal dice, okay? Numbered 1 to 6. A virtue roll means that it uses one of the 4 virtues that is at the core of the game. Okay? Now these are modeled on the 4 virtues of a fencer based on the fencing treatise of the fencing master Fiore de' Liberi. They also, if you're a scholar of medieval or Renaissance history, they also correspond quite nicely to the humors, but the animals make a lot more sense than the humors. Okay? So you either have a simple roll or a virtue roll. When you're rolling a virtue roll, whenever you get a crit success represented by one of the animal symbols, that will correspond to a virtue crit on the tables that we will see later on, which are specific to certain actions. If you get an X, that means it is a crit fail. Crit fails also have specific effects based on the virtue that you are rolling and what you're doing. Now, usually you will be able to choose, when you're doing a roll, you'll be able to spend multiple virtue or to roll multiple dice. We will explain, when we get into activations, we'll explain this a little bit more, but let it suffice to know, if I spend multiple virtues to make multiple rolls, I roll dice equal to the virtue I spend, and I choose the better result, or the result I prefer. So, if I roll 3 dice, and I get a crit on one of them, a crit success on one of them, then I will likely choose the crit success. If I roll multiple crits on multiple dice, then I can choose the crit success that I prefer. That will depend on the situation, and that's a lot of where the skill of the game comes from. If I roll multiple dice and I get a crit fail on all of them, then of course I'm stuck with having a crit fail. But I can choose which crit fail I use. Which one is the worst case scenario preferred depends on the situation, and you'll have to judge that as the player. If I roll multiple virtue dice and one comes up a crit, well, I would highly suggest, since you can choose the result you prefer, that you not choose the crit. Who knows, that might be what you want, but it's unlikely. Now, even on a simple roll, whatever the roll is, a 6 is always a success, and a 1 is always a fail, no matter the modifiers involved.